Okay, we are now live.
Good morning, evening, afternoon, folks who are joining us. Welcome. We're so pleased to have you here with us. We're just giving it 1 minute or so to let folks in, making sure they've been able to find the space and find the link. But as you are joining us, if you would like to introduce yourself, well, let me double check with my colleagues in terms of whether we have a chat function. Mara or Laura, could you confirm that for me?
I believe we do. So if folks want to try putting their names in the chat.
Perfect.
We do.
I see it. Thank you all. Sorry, we are, I'm sure like you, using this, the Pathable system for CSW for the first time. So since we have a chat function, we would love to welcome you to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're calling in from. My name is Bridget Burns, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm based off of unceded Lenape territory, or so-called Brooklyn. And I am the director of the Women's Environment and Development Organization. And WEDO is one of several groups that are part of the Action Coalition, Feminist Action for Climate Justice. And we're really excited to introduce this Action Coalition to you today, and hopefully get you thinking about how the work that you do relates to the areas that we're thinking about under this Action Coalition. So again, while we're letting people in, please feel free to introduce yourself, where you're coming from, the organization that you're part of, or a group that you might be part of. We also would invite you to think about what feminist action for climate justice means to you. So that could be a word, or it could be an action. We would welcome you to also put that into the chat as well. And I'm just going to take 1 second to try to introduce myself in the chat to give folks some more time to come in. It wasn't an introduction, but at least I know where it is now on my iPad, and I can follow along as folks are introducing themselves. Thank you so much for sharing. It's wonderful to see so many folks on here from so many different places. And I think with that, I'm just checking and making sure we have our participants in. I think with that, we will get started then. So could I ask you to just move us to the next slide, Mara? Thank you. So as said, WEDO is one of a group of folks who make up the Action Coalition, Feminist Action for Climate Justice. Some of the other co-leads of this Action Coalition are speakers with us today, but many of the speakers that we have with us today are actually partners, members of our network, and really folks who we know are leading across different areas in different ways on the types of actions and the types of solutions that we see as really centering what feminist action for climate justice looks like. So we're really excited to spend the majority of this space, the majority of this time together, exploring the different ways and the different solutions that are working currently to center a human rights-based, gender-just approach to climate action. We have, I'll go through the speakers when we get to their slides when they come in individually. So could you just go to the next slide, Mara? So today we're going to frame the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition. We're going to give you a really brief introduction to our Action Coalition blueprint. And as said, we want to showcase what different action areas and initiatives look like under this blueprint, and then look ahead to the ways in which you can engage. And I'm hoping that by the end, We'll also have lots of questions for how you can engage, for what the next steps are, and also sharing opportunities for you to share the work and the initiatives that you are undertaking in your own communities, in your own countries. Next slide. So many of you might be very familiar with the Generation Equality Forum, but we don't want to assume that. Generation Equality is a moment in time, really, for looking back on 25 years of implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. And in order to look back at the legacy of the Beijing Platform for Action, to understand where progress has been made, but also to recognize that the world has changed, that while we have seen progress in certain areas, particularly around gender equality, there are many places where issues have not advanced, at least not at the pace that we had hoped. I think that for many of you who are experiencing continued high rates of gender-based violence, who see quite clearly the impacts that this pandemic has had on gender inequalities and the roles that folks play in their households, in their communities, the access to rights and resources that people have, as well as the other crises that we are facing, the multiple forms of crises, a biodiversity crisis, a climate crisis, and of course the pandemic that we are all experiencing. And so generation equality really was thought about as an opportunity to see the spaces where progress is still needed and come up with a renewed blueprint for action connected to the Beijing Platform for Action that would give us the opportunity over a 5-year period to advance specific goals. The Generation Equality Forum itself is being co-led by the governments of Mexico and France alongside UN Women, and many civil society organizations are engaged in different ways. Many sit on the decision-making body of the action areas and what the forum itself will look like. And then there are those such as WEDO and the other organizations in this action coalition that is trying to drive the framing of these, what are 6 action areas. If you look up Generation Equality, there's a Generation Equality Forum website that has a lot of details that we won't go into on this call in terms of what the process looks like. There is a session in Mexico that's being held at the end of March. And then there is also a session in Paris, France, being held just at the end of June and the beginning of July. That will be the launch of these blueprints for action. Next slide. So the 6 action coalition areas are gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, feminist action for climate justice, technology and innovation for gender equality, and feminist movements and leadership. And I will say that there's a lot of work being done to make sure that the nexus of these action areas, understanding, for example, that feminist action for climate justice fundamentally requires us to tackle gender-based violence. It requires bodily autonomy. It requires economic justice and rights. So trying to see the synergies between these action areas, and also recognizing some of the cross-cutting issues to all of these, including a focus on women, peace, and security, as well as a focus on youth and adolescent girls. These are all some of the framing pieces for the Generation Equality Forum, as we're trying to identify what key actions under these 6 areas look like. And these 6 areas were really defined with consultations with civil society. Again, going back to where did the Beijing Platform for Action work to advance actions, and what is the current status of the world right now, where we need to create and enhance and advance actions to particularly deal with the crises we're facing now. Next slide. So under the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Blueprint, we are working together to develop a blueprint that will deliver concrete progress towards gender equality and the realization of girls' and women's human rights. We've been tasked to identify 3 to 4 game-changing, transformative, and measurable actions that will inspire, catalyze the efforts of multiple stakeholders. And we have been tasked to advance this vision against a 5-year implementation timeline. And so I will show you the 4 broad areas that we are working through as a framing of our blueprint, noting that these areas are still being defined and still being given the real substance in terms of what the action commitments under it look like. And what we'll spend the rest of this call on with our speakers is trying to highlight what kinds of solutions, as said before, we think really relate to these key broad action areas, and hopefully get you excited to join the Action Coalition. Next slide. So that the broad action areas that we've identified so far through a series of consultations, again, as said, among our Action Coalition that's made up of government, civil society, UN organizations, as well as philanthropy. So the first is to increase the direct access to financing for gender just climate solutions. And I would say, at least from WEDO's perspective, we see this as a really critical area to shift the flows of financing away from harm to invest in care. And what does that look like beyond just perhaps earmarking a certain amount of funds to particular programs, to particular solutions? That's of course part of this, but a bigger piece is how do we really take a systemic approach to shifting finance as a whole? We want to then enable women and girls to lead a just transition to a green economy. And of course, this is multifaceted in terms of enhancing leadership, of breaking down gender norms, of understanding what a just transition looks like to a low carbon economy, what jobs will look like, and how do we ensure that the transition that we have will not just take the current sexual division of labor and reinforce that in a quote unquote low carbon economy. But it also, of course, means broader systemic approaches as well. We want to build the resilience of women and girls to climate impacts and disaster risks. And finally, we want to increase the collection and use of data on the gender environment nexus. And this came out really strongly from a lot of the co-leads, as well as in consultations we've had, of just the real challenge folks have with not having access to data, but also with data collection in general at this intersection. Next slide. So now we're going to jump into conversations with our wonderful allies and partners who are on the call to think through what does action across these 4 areas look like. So I want to jump right away to my colleague Ann Barr, who is from Women Engaged for a Common Future, and is going to share with us a program that the Women and Gender Constituency, in partnership with WECF, has been working on for the last 6 years now, around really elevating gender just climate solutions as key solutions to the climate challenge. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bridget, and good day to everybody. Good morning or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm very pleased to be able to present our Gender Just Climate Solutions Awards and Mentoring Program to you, and why it's so important to shift finance and increase direct access to finance for these type of solutions. So if you want to have a look at these solutions, on the next slide, you will see the cover of the publication that we just came out with in this last December, featuring the award winners of the last 6 years. As indeed we started the Gender Just Climate Solutions program at COP21 in Paris, together with the Women and Gender constituency as one of the major, I would say, concrete advocacy illustration of our work. So in the next slide, you see a few pictures of the highlights and the big moments of the award ceremony from COP21 to COP25. And the next slide shows you where the 15 award winners that have won the awards through the years come from. So you see a very broad diversity of countries and people. And these award-winning solutions are really there to highlight why it's important to mainstream gender justice into climate action. And they are all really exemplary initiatives. We've conducted in 2020 a survey about the impact of these initiatives. And on the next slide, I can show you how these initiatives have demonstrated to really act both on climate mitigation and adaptation. So they can reduce emissions and air pollution, protect biodiversity, including, for example, reforestation. They work also on water protection or reduce the risk for climate-related disasters. They contribute to resilient organic agriculture or sustainable production and consumption. So it's a very diverse set of exemplary initiatives. On the next slide, you will see that, of course, these solutions also have very strong impact on gender, and they actually bring multiple transformative benefits for the entire society. Whether they are bringing positive change in gender roles and gender norms, whether they work on increasing women's rights, empowering women on the social and economic side, or whether they bring a positive change also in the community, in gender relations and power relations. They have a very broad and diverse impact on gender. On the next slide, I can also show you that our work has been to contribute to the upscaling and the replication of such exemplary solutions. And how have these been successful? But as you see, through our program, inviting the award winners back into participating into climate conferences, into the COPs every year, and working with the award winners through workshops, through trainings and exchange of experience, we've seen that most of the award winners have been able to actually reach a new scale or enlarge the dimension of their action. And many of them have reached, in the next slide, sorry, many of them have been able to reach new recognition and especially new financial support. And that is really what we are leading at. I also wanted to bring on one important element is that all of these initiatives have shown to have a positive impact on the resilience to the COVID crisis as well, which you see on the next slide. So they have demonstrated really a very strong resilience capacity in being able to run awareness raising or information activities related to hygiene measures, bringing vital support to their beneficiaries who have lost income during the crisis, for example, or also distributing protection materials and making advocacy to defend the rights of their beneficiaries. So these are really solutions and initiatives that bring a transformational change. Now, let me give you just a few examples, if I still have time, of the type of initiatives that we have celebrated the impacts of in the recent years. So one example in the next slide, yes, this is from Dorothée. So Dorothée Lisenga is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and she works on ensuring land tenure rights for women and their ability to participate in forest governance. And in the next slide, you will see that the impact has been very strong, with almost 500 women advocates being trained, mapping, exercising being done to recognize where women work in community, on which land, and have their land tenure rights being recognized. Also certified ownership titles for women, and an integration of all this work into the new climate policy of the Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Another example is from India, Trupti Jain. She leads a social enterprise called Narita Services, and this social enterprise has invented a water storage solution for very poor women farmers in different drought-prone areas of India. And she has brought, in the next slide, you will see a transformation of living conditions for thousands of women farmers, involving them really in the maintenance and the technology, which is something very, let's say, transformational for women in this society. And it has really improved their ability to survive and be resilient in times of crisis. I think I won't have time to run over more examples, but I invite you to take a look at the publication that you can find on the website of the Women and Gender Constituency, and also of WECF, where you will find all of these examples and many more of exemplary solutions that have been nominated for these awards. And they all demonstrate why it is so important to really shift finance and bring much more means for these type of solutions that bring multiple co-benefits to the society. And I'm very glad to be able to coordinate this program for the Women and Gender Constituency. So thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Anne. And thank you for sharing all of those with us. I think, you know, when you look at the blueprint and the work that's being done, it's exactly these types of solutions that we know we need to center in our dialogue on climate action. But so often they are not the types of solutions that we see in spaces such as the UN, or in larger spaces and conversations at national level that are thinking about what climate action looks like. And just to give you a little backstory, the Women and Gender Constituency was inspired to do this work, you know, over 6 years ago around one of the large climate summits, when as a constituency, we had put forward some of these solutions to be highlighted as effective climate action. And we're told that these were too small, and that they didn't, you know, fit the profile of climate action. And so we really understood then that there was a lot of work that needed to be done to show why these replicated and invested in at scale were sustainable models that could be used in communities around the world, and that we're having transformative impacts on creating resilience in communities. And so hopefully, as part of this, as part of the blueprint over the next 5 years, we'll be creating a greater channel, a greater amplifier of these already existing women-led, often women-led, gender just solutions that are working at community level. And with that, I want to pass directly to Mrinali Rai, who is someone who works particularly around biodiversity for many years now, who coordinates the Women's Caucus at the Convention on Biological Diversity, to share again these intersecting crises. So over to you.
Thanks, Bridget. Just give me a moment. I'm trying to share my screen. Just to make sure that everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm going to keep my, let me just do this if everybody can't see me. Okay, so that's clear. Hi, everybody. This is Mrinalini, and I will be talking about the action toward enabling women and girls to lead just transitions to a green economy. So around the world, women are leaders, stewards, educators, engineers, farmers, and scientists who contribute invaluable experience and knowledge to effectively safeguard our environment and realize sustainable development goals. So having that basis of the important roles that women play in different spheres. So I just want to do a quick analysis of where women are. So where are they in top decision-making positions? So this month, during this International Women's Day, IUCN revealed a new data on women's leadership in environmental ministries. So in 2015, the IUCN's gender and environment and gender information data showed that there were 12% of 881 national environmental ministries across 193 countries were led by women. The same study that they did in 2020, 5 years later, IUCN's new data reveals incremental change. So there has been in 2020, women held 15% of top jobs at ministries of environmental sectors. So there has been a roughly 3% change. While many countries have developed or consolidated ministries focused on climate change in the last 5 years, according to the IUCN, 26 total ministries, 15% are headed by women. In 46 countries with forest-related ministries, 18% are headed by women, while 11% of water irrigation ministries are headed by women. Now, looking at this change, it's not really much, but like I think Bridget also talked about, that it hasn't been as expected as we would have, looking at that it's been 25 years, the Beijing Platform of Action, and looking at this data. So this is what we are looking at with the decision makers. So I just wanted to give you a quick glance of what are some of the realities facing at the national level. So I just took a quick example of women in agriculture in India. And this is again, just recently, a few days ago, this organization, a local organization, is a forum for women's farmers' rights called Makam, took out this infographic. And the data they have used is from the census of 2011, where it shows that 65.1% of the total female workers in the country are involved in agriculture. So that's a big percentage of the population. Now, the operational land holding of women farmers, they found that there was no data on land owned by women, but they used the data from 2015 and 2016, and which showed that there is 13.8% that they own. However, a footnote here is saying that the operational land holding is not the same as ownership of land. So this is where I think we're also talking about where do we really need to strengthen these participation, these governance models for a green economy. And these are the statistics that are existing even in the current day. But however, having said that, I just in the last minute, I thought I would share this, is that though there is hope, I'm being very positive here. This is a cover of a Time magazine of this month. And if you have been following the movement, the farmers' movement taking place in India since a couple of months, actually, this photo of women made it to the front cover and showing the way that women are now getting out, and women who have never even left their villages are out in the capital city of Delhi and demanding for their rights, and also demanding for their rights to be recognized as farmers. So there are, again, on the side, there are these movements that are growing on, and there are women movement at the local level, at the ground level, who are working towards getting their voices heard. However, as we are already over a year dealing with COVID, this is a data report from the UNDP on the policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on indigenous peoples. And their data on the women was that this year, 2020, will push 96 million people into extreme poverty, and 47 million of whom are women and girls. So this is also really showing us that, I think I won't repeat a lot that what the panelists have also talked before of this extra burden of on the roles and responsibilities of women with the since the pandemic started. This is again another issue, I would say, for a greener economy for us, and this issue that has been coming up, it's not something new, is on looking at the biodiversity human rights defenders. And this, again, is a very popular report that we all are familiar with. And to mitigate climate change, we have to tackle the drivers of biodiversity loss. And many of these communities of whom are indigenous peoples, and many of whom are women. So there are, again, these are the women who are defending their lands and territories and resources on the ground. So what do we really need? So understanding the gender environment nexus is not only key to understanding social and environmental equalities and barriers to sustainable development, but to unlocking options for transformation actions as well. According to a UN Environment Report of 2016, data gaps at this nexus, however, are persistent. Limited collection, dissemination, and application of gender environment statistics, including at national level, affects decision makers and practitioners' knowledge and capacity to develop and adopt well-informed and effective policies and programming at all levels. So what we're really looking at is that women's rights, women's secure land rights are fundamental human rights. Giving them that right gives them a right to their culture, right to health, right to their self-determination, including FPIC, free, prior, informed consent, and right to life. Prioritizing women's political and social empowerment and leadership, particularly for those who experience intersecting forms of discrimination of race, class, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, location, etc., that prevent their participation on equal terms. We need to ensure that women's consistently suppressed histories, voices, and perspectives can come forward and they can lead. From the perspective of women and those facing multiple oppressions, having safe space, equitable treatment, and recognition of fundamental rights and freedom, rights to access and ownership of land and resources and benefit sharing is essential to a just transition to a greener economy. So having said that, I'm just going to see what we are doing as Women for Biodiversity is that, as Bridget said, that we are following up on the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, one of the Rio conventions together with UNSCCC and UNCCD. And in that, I think this is what we are looking at synergies, looking at where this generation equality forum and the discussions on gender I'm really hoping would again strengthen this biodiversity framework, which is called the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, in helping us to strengthen these elements of that draft. So I'm just going to kind of end in that. Sorry for rushing in, and I'll be here for any questions that you may have. Bridget, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrinalini. It was a really helpful overview, and there are some follow-up questions that folks had in the chat. If you want to take a look at that, we'll also note all of these questions and make sure to get back, as well as share the link to the website, Women for Biodiversity, that was just shared. Thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to Laura from IUCN, Laura Cooper Hall. And IUCN, I will say, is also one of the co-leads of this action coalition. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Bridget, and thanks everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. On behalf of the gender team at IUCN, we're grateful to have this opportunity to unite with allies and especially to hear from you, the CSW audience, to ensure that the global community forges urgent action to meet climate resilience and women's rights goals, because of course these go hand in hand. IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, is a member union, and we are a convener for science-based knowledge and action. This is the frame we use when we're working and in these collaborative spaces. We joined as a consortium partner because we know that we can never meet our sustainable development and conservation goals for a healthy and peaceful planet without working with partners and across sectors to further gender equality. For us, the value of, or for engaging with generation equality is twofold. One, it is a chance to renew attention and momentum to the important work that has been and continues to take place and must continue to grow and scale. We must recognize and pay tribute to work that has already been happening, and that we also must recognize that we still have work to do. And it is also to use our networks and the spaces we are in to bring feedback from non-members in the Action Coalition into the commitment and action design process. The action statements under the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Blueprint echo the range of work IUCN is implementing, growing, and contributing to, and speak to the priorities IUCN believes are fundamental to a just future. Resilience is a key component. What does resilience mean? To IUCN, it means a healthy planet rich with diverse and flourishing ecosystems and a stable climate, which people are responsible for, and in turn allows for all people to thrive for life and sustained livelihoods. And a lot of this can link to what Mrinalini has pointed out on biodiversity. At the end of the day, resilience is about our ability to live and thrive and to create an ecosystem for that. Resilience also means equal access to resources and to support systems. This is fundamental. We know this and we see it every day in our programming. The concept of resilience touches on all of the action coalitions. It's likely that many of you listening now are working on issues which strengthen the resilience of women, that many of you are working on issues that will support women as climate threats worsen across the globe. At IUCN, we're looking for ways to leverage this blueprint in the Action Coalition and the value of working in a more integrated way. That includes working across hubs and in particular tackling gender-based violence as one of the most pervasive and perverse forms of keeping inequity intact, not least when it comes to natural resources and to climate action. At IUCN, we believe the blueprint actions of the Generation Equality Hub focused on gender-based violence, or GBV, are also ours. They include creating and enabling a policy and programming environment for the elimination of GBV, adapting and scaling evidence-based strategies to mitigate and respond to GBV, supporting survivors, and ensuring women's organizations are resourced and positioned with power to exercise their rights. Why? Because we know that GBV and climate change are linked, that GBV is both an expression of gender inequality and a tool to keep it intact, including to sustain the status quo when it comes to the power dynamics surrounding the drivers of climate change and climate change response. Last year, with grateful support from USAID, we were able to publish a major study examining GBV and climate change links. We found that GBV is regularly used across sectors as a form of socioeconomic control to maintain or promote unequal and gendered power dynamics related to accessing, using, controlling, and benefiting from natural resources. We also found clear evidence that the potential for violence increases in the face of environmental stressors, where scarcity increases tension and power imbalance and reduces resilience. This is a serious concern when we think about the impacts of a changing climate on countries, communities, and families. Climate change decision makers, donors, programmers, and projects can be positioned as agents of change to tackle these dynamics, critical to resilience of women and girls in all their diversity. Turning the recommendations of our research into action, we created a space for curated knowledge, tools, and technical support for actors working across environment and climate-related spheres. The GBV and Environment Linkages Center now houses a library, technical tools, and project support aimed to close the knowledge gap on GBV environment issues, mobilize learning, and forge collaborative action toward ending GBV and securing environmental sustainability. Including GBV in environment and climate change work is vital for gender responsive environment policymaking, programming, and practice. Generation Equality understands the importance of partnership and working across sectors, including always with women and girls and women's organizations at the heart of driving solutions. As a member union, IUCN echoes this priority and believes in the importance of tackling tough issues together. We have a decades-long collaboration with UNDP and WEDO on gender and climate change, not least in our joint founding of the Global Gender and Climate Alliance more than 10 years ago, an alliance that grew to over 100 diverse members from around the world. We look forward to picking up where we left off and using the blueprint established through the Feminist Action for Climate Justice to guide our action and the priorities and goals of our partners and potential partners. At the moment, we are transitioning into finalizing the actions and likely will need to develop indicators for measurement, which will contribute to a roadmap to define what we are trying to measure and trying to achieve in this coalition. What are the measures of change and the indicators that you all see linked to these actions? We would really love to hear your thoughts. How do we better measure what resilience is and what it means to communities? I'd love to hear from you all as listeners and potential contributors to the goals and indicators about what you think is most important to appreciate and include in our Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that. And I'm noting as well the different questions in the chat. There was a really great question on, what is the push for women's land ownership, how it in relation to climate change? Is there an impact that women's land ownership has on climate and on protecting ecosystems as well? So that's a useful question for folks to think about. There was also a request for reports and links for some of the stats being shared here. I'm sure we will, I don't know the exact process right now, but I'm sure these slides will be made available to you on the Pathable site if that's possible. And if folks want to continue to share links in the chat, we will do so. But with that, I'm going to move to Lalu Cadilla from ICIMAD. Lalu, over to you. Lalu, if you are speaking, you might be muted.
Hello. Yeah, hello. Thank you, Bridget. I'm Lalu Cadilla from ICIMAD, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. First of all, I'd like to thank Laura and team for giving us this opportunity to share our experience in this important forum and also learn from others. I'm going to talk about collection and use of data on gender and environmental nexus and our experience in this area. I think I no need to remind the importance of the data here, but still I'd like to take example from the COVID-19 situation, which is very recent and everyone have experience of this one, to understand the importance of data in everyday's life. I'm not from the health background. Even for me, I would go to visit the WHO site every day, especially at the beginning of COVID-19, to understand the situation, how fast it was spreading, and the scale and the intensity. So, and the data was very helpful, actually, especially for me to take a precautionary measures in daily life. So hence, this shows the importance of data in everyday's life. Over time, we can also see that the differential impact of different countries and communities of this pandemic. So for example, Nepal reports higher suicide cases during this crisis. This shows any changes are not neutral and people react to these changes differently based on their roles, responsibilities, and other situations. This shows the importance of disaggregated data again. The international decisions made on gender disaggregated data at different times, including Beijing Conference on Women in 1995, also proves the importance of the disaggregated data. Importance of disaggregated data in Hindu Kush Himalayan region where we work is still higher because of higher diversity, higher impact of climate change, and lower coping capacity of the people living here. However, data gap is widely accepted fact, at least in our region. It is worse for disaggregated and nexus data. If available, they are very much scattered in different reports. This has been a challenge for effective implementation of policy and plans and reaching to the needy people on time. Other important issue is data consistency across countries. ICIMOD works in 8 member countries, and our focus is more on the transboundary issues. So we work for river basins, transboundary landscape, air pollution, etc. In this case, the data consistency is a major challenge for us to understand the context better across the countries. Further data collection in Hindu Kush Himalaya region is difficult and also very costly because of its difficult mountain terrain. ICIMOD being a knowledge organization, part of our work is to fill these data gaps, for which we have different initiatives. We conduct research and assessments, and gender and social inclusion is one of the priority area. For example, poverty and vulnerability assessment, we have already completed. Hindu Kush Himalaya region assessment report is available there. And based on which we conducted the ministerial level summit, and which also signed the HK's call to action, which includes 6 urgent actions for the HKH. And one of them is related to data and knowledge. And all of these data, like other more things, the HKS status on sustainable development goal is under progress. And we are also working on the Hindu Kush Himalaya region poverty analysis. This is also under progress. And those already completed the data are available in terms of the report also in our repository, HimalDoc. Everyone can visit that one and get that one. And the 800, this source shows the 868,369 downloads in 2020 itself. So this is very important. All data contains there, and in terms of report, and then in other forms also. And based on the SK's assessment, all data, what comes from there, they are also put on regional database system. So this includes, also includes the MODIS data. In 2020, 751 unique users downloaded a total of 4,266 data sets. So this is functional. Other important thing, very much focused on the gender, sex and age disaggregated data from all national statistics are pulled together in the form of gender atlas. And then this aims to address the access issue in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. So though they are available, we can't find them in one place, and this will be helpful for that one. ICIMOD also conducts pilot and access research on resilient mountain solutions to demonstrate evidence and to influence the policy. And there are many examples that they are adopted and upscaled by the government and others. And we believe in partnership and engage with many global, regional, and national institutions like IPCC, IPPES, UNFCCC, CBD, Himalayan UISS, many more. So we have Sandy, which focus on more economic aspect, economic research, and then Himalayan University Consortium, which collaborates many academic and research institutions across the region. Capacity building is other important component for us. We focus the capacity of the country partners from all 8 member countries for adopting gender responsive and evidence-based decision-making practices. Co-development of climate and information service is one way of promoting use and integration of biophysical and socio-economic data in evidence-based decision-making. In this whole process in Azimuth gender responsive monitoring and evaluation system is very important and playing a great role for mainstreaming gender in all Azimuth supported program. So which is also highlighted in one of our publication, making gender count, leveraging monitoring and evaluation to mainstreaming gender. Gender is complex issue. Thus, both the quantitative and qualitative data are important for understanding and promoting their use, has different phases to consider. So with this, I'd like to conclude here. Thank you very much for listening. If there are any questions and more elaboration is required, so I'm happy to respond that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lalu. And I hope that from this, and I know that colleagues have been putting links in the chat to some of the reports that you shared. Sorry, Bridget, you muted yourself. You're muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
was I muted the whole time? Sorry about that. So hopefully you're starting to see what the possibility of this blueprint could really be in terms of the understanding that this is a very layered issue of what does real feminist action for climate justice look like? How does that action tackle both the solutions that we have, the finance that is needed for those solutions, the data collection that we have to do to be able to advocate for effective policy change, the work that needs to be due to change laws and norms in terms of building resilience and capacity, as well as the fundamentals of shifting whose voice is being centered in these conversations through really advancing the leadership of women and girls and all their diversity at all levels of climate action. And part of that is the power in the diverse partnership behind the Action Coalition, CSOs, UN agencies, institutions, governments, and philanthropy as well. And I want to pass now to Maria Inez Rivendiniera, who's a gender and climate change specialist with the UNDP NDC support program in Ecuador. Over to you.
Thank you, Bridget. Good morning and good afternoon for everyone. Thank you for having me. I am pleased to present the Ecuadorian experience about the collection and use of data on the gender environment nexus, specifically in climate change policy. In Ecuador, a gender mainstreaming approach has been held at the first national determinate contribution to the Paris Agreement during the period 2018 and 2020. Environment and the National Council for Gender Equality with the NDC Super Program, the UNDP, have led the process for developing a specific gender methodology, both for quantitative analysis and for qualitative data collection through the participatory process. As a result, the NDC and its implementation plan has a gender baseline and the identification of gender gaps and their responses by sector and prioritized initiatives. The main gender gaps identified for all sectors in mitigation and adaptation are: first, quality and valid gender disaggregated data linked with the efforts for reduced emissions and with the need for increasing resilient capacities and reducing vulnerabilities. The second barrier found is the institutional and organizational gender capacities. There is a cultural behavior which reproduces gender roles and stereotypes, limiting the well-being for women and children. The third gap for all sectors is participation and representation at technical, scientific, and decision-making spaces for women. A rigorous gender analysis allows to have a data collection and strategic interpretation of differentiated benefits for women and men into the climate action. Nevertheless, there are a lack of specific statistics for a better comprehension of women and men conditions, practical and strategical needs in adaptation and mitigation scenarios. Some examples are violence based on gender, criminalization of defenders of nature, food insecurity, climate migration, housing unrest, decision-making, and women real participation related with the access and use and control of natural resources, biodiversity loss, land degradation, among others. With this background, there is an ongoing process for building a gender and climate change information system in Ecuador with georeference data. With the support of the NDC support program, Let's LAC and the Mexican Institute for Statistics, this geoportal will be in an open source tool and will allow an interface with different baselines and data systems. At the moment, there is under developing the design of this platform, and the government is expecting to have all the system working for 2022. However, at 2018, with the available data, a pilot for integrating gender perspective into the monitoring, report, and verification system at the Electricity Initiative was completed successfully. At the second phase, since 2020, the NDC support program is supporting the integration of gender perspective into the finance tracking methodologies, business rounds, and economic analysis. The data collection and the management of strategic information are critical for a better comprehension of women and men realities, their needs and opportunities. Without information, their realities are invisible for public policy design. In environment and climate change action, social and gender data is not always available. That is the case in Ecuador. The efforts for conservation to diversity, adaptation to the negative impacts of climate change, or reduce emissions could fail if they do not take in account of the social and gender data about the local communities. Information about the population conditions must be essential at the moment of design, implement and monitoring environment and climate change actions. The better way to interlink the Sustainable Development Goals is making decisions based on evidence. For making that happen, it's mandatory to have better quality of data. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maria Inez. And we had some good questions in the chat around the use of acronyms that we have in these slides and the presentations, and that is a very valid concern as well. I think part of the Action Coalition, I think part of the work that we can do in this blueprint through these partnerships is demystifying the broader kind of international level process space where some of these issues get discussed, this intersection of gender, climate, and biodiversity, to make sure, of course, that is both reflective of what is happening at grassroots level, but that it is also interpretable, if that's the right word, that we're creating systems where information is flowing really from the grassroots to these processes, and making sure that these processes are both being responsive to and led by the work that's happening at grassroots level. So our last intervention is going to come from Molly Gilligan, also speaking to, who's a gender environment policy specialist, also speaking to this need for enhancing our collection of data at this environment and gender nexus. So over to you, Molly.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. I am Molly Gilligan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm on Piscataway land in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm thrilled to be with you all today to join this conversation and to discuss the importance of data on the gender and environment nexus. I wanted to thank all the previous speakers. I've really enjoyed learning about your initiatives around the various action areas. To further highlight the fourth action area on increasing the collection and use of data on the gender and environment nexus, I wanted to first spotlight efforts that IUCN and UNEP, the UN Environment Program, took together to learn more about national level statistics and enabling environments. And I know there have been some questions requesting links to publications. So later on, I'll put links for every publication that I mention. So in our report, we explore the idea that collection and dissemination of national level gender and environment statistics offers an opportunity to shine a light on a set of interconnected issues that can either undermine or accelerate progress towards sustainable development. These statistics advance global understanding of gender gaps and help to tell a story of transformation, connecting the dots on how realizing women's rights and gender equality can support outcomes across the environmental and sustainable development sphere and vice versa. Through action research in Laos, Kenya, Mexico, and Jordan, we noted a few key aspects for creating an enabling environment for national level gender and environment statistics. This includes national gender equality laws, mandates, and policies to provide a supportive framework, coordination among ministries to ensure the interconnected nature of these topics is embraced, and capacity for gender environment statistics to support cross-sectoral and cross-institutional capacity for both understanding and applying statistics for climate justice action. Data on the gender and environment nexus can offer a space to bring people together toward advancing gender equality and sustainable development. Data at every level is important, which means that everyone can play a role. While the enabling environments that I mentioned were identified to support national level efforts, these concepts can carry into other types of organizations and work as well, at all levels, ranging from international development to grassroots community-led efforts to advance gender equality and climate change adaptation. So for example, a strong supportive policy framework can provide a mandate for prioritizing gender equality within climate change adaptation efforts, coordination either internally with a different department or perhaps seeking out complementary partner organizations can help to strengthen the cross-sectoral approach to these interlinked concepts. And promoting advanced statistical capacity can help all of us to better collect and or use data within our work, whether at project level, for policy advocacy, or wherever your focus lies. In addition to enabling environments, we also identified indicators that can be used to gather information and strategies for national action as stakeholders work together toward meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. This poses both challenges and opportunities moving forward. We have identified entry points within the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, where sex disaggregation can contribute to a better understanding of gender considerations within environmental sectors. However, there are really only two relevant environmental indicators currently within the framework that do include sex disaggregation in their methodologies. So these are SDGs 1.4.2 on secure rights to land and 5.A.1 on agricultural population with secure rights to agricultural land. So many countries, regions, agencies, and organizations have embraced the opportunities, advancing gender and environment statistics within their own work. In addition to the amazing examples we've heard from the other speakers, my cat is saying hi as well. I also wanted to mention that Mexico is a trailblazer on this issue, and also to highlight an effort that UN Women and SCAP are doing together to support data collection efforts in the Asia and Pacific region. This opportunity also extends beyond the Sustainable Development Goals as well, which is why I'm so excited to see gender and environment data as a priority action. Fred, she loves Zoom calls. Anyway, I'm excited to see data be one of the priority areas for the Feminist Action on Climate Justice Coalition. It's also why I hope that groups interested in participating in this coalition will consider the ways in which you can advance data collection within your own work. I also wanted to mention that I was thrilled to see one of the previous speakers highlight new data from IUCN about women environmental ministers. So I was going to use that as an example of what action on this area can look like. So I won't be too repetitive, but just to say that it was an interesting an interesting time to update the statistics. So we saw a 3% increase from 2015 to 2020, which also corresponds to a 3% increase seen by the IPU when looking at women parliamentarians over the same time period. Another really fun example to get to what Bridget mentioned in the beginning about connecting the different action areas for these coalitions is that IUCN and USAID recently published a report on the triple nexus on gender equality, climate change vulnerability, and state fragility. So that's another just cool way that data can be used to connect these topics, to highlight where they intersect, and to advance our understanding of the roles that women can play. So with that, I would encourage each of you to consider ways in which you can promote an enabling environment for advancing data on the gender environment nexus within your own work. Thank you. Back to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Molly. We love CAT coworkers and data at this intersection. So thank you for bringing us both of that. All right, so we are going to move now into really an opportunity to hear from all of you and to think through what does engagement with this action coalition potentially look like. We wanted to really give a flavor of the different initiatives that we are trying to bring together in the action coalition. Again, folks working at many different levels. And I did want to say, as we think about this, you know, feminist action for climate justice. What do we mean by feminist? And what do we mean by climate justice? And I'm not going to say that I speak for all of the Action Coalition co-leads in this space, but one of the things from the perspective of what does feminist action look like, I'm often reminded of a quote by WEDO's co-founder, Bella Abzug, who said, "Women do not want to simply be mainstreamed into a polluted stream. We want to change the stream, make it clean and green and safe for all, every gender, race, creed, sexual orientation, age, and ability." And Bella said that over 25 years ago. And I think from the perspective of what we are trying to do, it is really beyond just mainstreaming gender into environmental policy or action. It's really thinking about what is a systemic approach, what is feminist action that is about changing the polluted stream? How do we do this? How do we take these action areas, the action area and the blueprint, and make sure we're moving beyond what I think the last 10 years of work, particularly for those who work at this intersection, have been really doing a lot of the heavy lifting and work to try to make sure that we have international policies on environment and climate and biodiversity that understand the intersection to gender equality. But we're now at a really critical point of making sure that the change that we're pushing for is systemic in nature. And why climate justice is really grounding ourselves in the understanding that although climate change affects all of us, it fundamentally does not affect us equally in terms of who has access to resources, who has access to rights, but also in terms of, you know, and that cuts across countries as well as in communities themselves. And so I think that when we're thinking about what does action look like under these areas, it's really important that we take from the starting point of where we're all coming into this space. There are so many incredible grassroots activists, environmental defenders who are putting their bodies on the line to protect their communities from projects that they don't that they're not permitted on their lands, for example, that are putting their bodies on the lines to protect water, to protect the forests. And then we have, you know, UN organizations and institutions that are fighting within structures to reset the ways in which we collect data, to reset the ways in which we structure our leadership, structure our decision-making, to be more feminist, to be more equitable, and to really reflect the true diversity and representation of our communities and populations. And I think all of that work is critical, and it needs to be working in synergy together, and needs to be uplifting, and really needs to be driven by the action that's being demanded, particularly at grassroots level. So we're hoping, I think, again, speaking as myself, but on behalf of the other co-leads, we're hoping that this inspires you to think about joining this action coalition. And just to say a word on that, there is a process on the Generation Equality website right now to become a commitment maker. And you'll see in the lead up to the Paris session in June, I'm sure we'll have a lot more information to share with you on how you can get more involved. But right now, and we can share the link as well, if you think that this is an area that, hey, I'm doing work already in this, or my community is already working in this area, and I would like to, share that or make a commitment to be part of this action coalition, whether it is because you have an action that relates to finance and scaling finance, or you have a solution that you're implementing on the ground, you're working to build education, advocacy, capacity, and resilience at a grassroots level, or you're working on data collection, information sharing, beyond just data collection, education, transformative, gendered, and green education. What does that look like? We have a lot of partners doing work at that intersection as well. But here I'd like to open up to all of you to share again, the ways in which you are working that potentially relate to or contribute to this action area. Any thoughts that you have on things that you feel are missing from what we've shared here that's a critical component of what would be feminist action for climate justice that you haven't heard or you would like to hear more about. And I also will pose to my colleagues that we had some really, I think, useful questions around, why are we pushing for women's land rights, for example? What is the relationship to that in climate action? And perhaps those who want to extrapolate a bit more on why do we as a collective believe that enhancing gender equality is critical to climate action and vice versa. So I would welcome my colleagues to also, if anything inspires them to speak to that, to do so as well. Mara, just to check in with you, I'm not sure, can folks, if they raise their hand, can we invite them to unmute themselves?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm gonna just check, or maybe you could help me with this, Mara, in terms of checking the chat to see if anyone has added something in or if anyone has their hand raised.
Definitely. So one person, Mimi, has their hand raised. I'm also wondering if Laura has managed to collect a few questions from the chat throughout the event. So maybe we could take Mimi's question, and Laura, if you'd be willing to share a few that have come up in the chat, and then we can open it up for all panelists. Would that make sense?
I think the hand has been lowered.
I see. Apologies, accidental. No worries. Well, if folks would like to ask a question to any or all of the panelists, please just go to the bottom bar on Zoom where you see a hand, and you can press raise hand there. So I do see one raised right now from Shaida.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. I just had a question because I know that Molly, it says for her title that she's an environmental policy specialist. And I was kind of curious about like how this form of new inclusive data, not new, but more inclusive data collection, like focusing more on like equity, aligns with new governmental policy as well.
Thanks, that's a great question. Do you guys want me to address it now, or do we want to throw a couple of questions out? Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think we've all seen that data can help push policies forward. And also in terms of gender equality, we've also seen vice versa, where we've actually had really strong policies being adopted early on. And those policies include a mandate for collecting more information, collecting more data. So it's kind of interesting that in this sphere, I think a little bit different from in other spheres where the data is really required for the policy advocacy. We also see the policies coming first and then giving others the space and the support to spend time and resources on data collection as well. And so with respect to your question about sort of new, more inclusive data, I will say that well, we are thrilled that there is more and more new progress on this. It's not a brand new topic, and data collection efforts have been taking place at various levels for a while. But I think it's really key to see new data coming out and then finding the most strategic ways to use it. So that's kind of why I was excited to see the other presenter share the data on gender and environment women ministers, because you shared it in the context of highlighting women's leadership. And I was going to share in the context of like, here's fun new data. So even more exciting to see it being used in context like that. And I hope that gets to your question a little bit.
I wondered if I could pass over to Mrinalini, maybe to speak to the question on, and then invite anyone else who wants to come in as well on sort of the women's land ownership piece of this, and why this is critical to climate action and preservation of biodiversity.
Yeah, Bridget, thanks a lot. I think it's really key. When you're talking about green economy, you're talking about participation, you're talking about rights, human rights defenders. Women, they don't have any rights in a lot of communities of where I come from, most of South Asia or Southeast Asia, where women's rights are completely still not progressed from where they were before. So I think land, it's something that it gives you the right to choose how you want to develop. You're talking about economic empowerment. You cannot have economic empowerment if you don't have a right to resources. So when I'm talking about land rights, it's linked up with a lot of different things. You're talking about, like I said, if you have, it's tied to your culture. It's usually the women who are, we always talk about how women are the seed keepers and women are the backbones of intergenerational transfer of knowledge. But when it really comes for them to decide on what they really want to do with the resources they harvest from the forest, how they want to manage the agricultural land, they don't have that right. They are still seen as, caregivers, that's their role. So I think it's really fundamental to really recognize that you really can't ask for women's empowerment if their basic freedom to own something or be recognized, because a lot of the other, you'll also see it in a lot of the different cultures too, women are still struggling for their citizenship rights. Yeah, so they all are really interlinked of saying that for me, that's the basis of saying that unless and until you recognize a woman's right to her dignity, that's like is a whole compilation of rights to land, rights to a healthy environment, like human rights defenders, her rights of freedom, rights to choose what she wants, rights to her health, and they all are really tied down. And with land, especially in this part of the world, South Asia, Southeast Asia, where majority of the decision makers on land are men. Now, somebody also talked about looking at, when I'm talking about land, I showed the case of India, where 65% of the workforce of a sector are women, but there is not even data on how many women actually own land. And that's where we are at this stage. So I think it's really fundamental key in those sectors too, to address it, to ensure that they get the benefits from it, it could have the economic empower, which also will help them strengthen their resilience to mitigate climate change, to have their own projects. If they still have men handing that, it will be again them in the front, but not necessarily being able to make decisions. So I hope that helps a little bit, but it's a very complex situation.
No, I think it's really helpful. And I think it cuts across a lot of the different pieces of this action area, right? Of the fact that part of this is a challenge of not having the data to be able to make this case, and the need for understanding what land rights and land ownership looks like and what the impact is of them when you have more equitable access to rights and resources. So we have, of course, the fundamental human rights-based analysis and demand that for really to be able to have full dignity to ensure women's human rights, we need access and control over and access to rights and resources. And then, we do have some small evidence and case studies and work that's been done. So there is data and analysis that shows that, land is used differently, particularly in relation to agriculture, in terms of subsistence farming versus cash crops and cash farming, and what is the intention and what is the sustainability behind those approaches to the use of land. For example, the protection of land, there's evidence around the work being done to protect lands. There's a small study that came out just I think 2 years ago now in 2019, which looked in 3 countries on projects related to non-timber forest production that showed when you had gender equitable representation in the community groups that were working on this preservation, you had a higher level of efficacy in the way in which the forests were preserved, based on having more gender diverse and gender equal representation in those community groups. So we're starting to see, this is somewhat related to how we see what's happening at community level. We have evidence from what we're hearing from grassroots women's organizations, women farmers, of what they're experiencing. And we're starting to now see the data and analysis and research actually being linked to that, to the evidence that we have known as feminists and as activists for decades now, of the way in which you see this happening in communities and in countries around the world. I don't know if any of my other colleagues wanted to come in on that point of the, why this is a critical intersection to be investing in order to ensure effective climate action, as well as ensuring gender equality more broadly. Or if anyone else wants, I didn't see anyone else raise their hand in the chat or add anything in the chat box itself, but we would welcome any other inputs.
I saw one comment in the chat box that just inspired me. I thought maybe some of the other panelists would want to comment on it. And Lara, sorry, I know you have questions organized, but someone wrote in and said, "I'm just a grandmother in a small hill town. What can I do?" And I think that's such an inspiring question. And I'm so thrilled that this person has joined the discussion today, and wanted to see if anyone wanted to respond to that in particular.
Excellent. Did anyone want to respond to that? Work at an individual level? I can have a go while folks think about that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maran.
I'll follow.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that inspires me about this work is uplifting, is kind of doing the work to see where inspiring action is happening and playing the role of uplifting that work. And so I think part of individual advocacy that can be done is seeking in your own community where there is action that is already happening and uplifting that, if not starting it yourself. Because I think that when, at least for me, what is helpful in terms of dealing with these multiple forms of crises is making sure I'm doing so in collective by not trying to start something myself. Although I, of course, I know that folks around the world are doing incredible projects in their own communities, but I also recognize that there are advocacy networks that you can plug into, such as such as this Action Coalition. And there are spaces and groups that are already working at this intersection that you can join and can be part of. And so, my advice is typically to find your people, find other people, whether that's in your community, at your community level, or at a larger level, in terms of perhaps you want to get more engaged in folks who are working in global processes, for example, that sometimes seems really daunting to do. But we've actually, I can speak for the Women and Gender constituency at the UN climate negotiations. We work really hard to make sure that that space is accessible to anybody who wants to get more involved and who just wants to follow the process of what's happening. We welcome lots of people onto our calls. There's no requirement of expertise necessary. It's really just a requirement of passion and commitment. Over to you.
Oh, thanks. No, I was going to say that I think you already said a lot. I just want to add by saying that I think I want to take this moment to really give my gratitude to you. You are here, even if you're in a small hill town, you are here. I don't know what time it is there for you. And besides all the advocacy work and all that, I think one of the really key elements I would like to say is that you already are doing it as being a grandmother. Grandmothers are very special. They make the best food. I think grandmothers are special because, you know, you have so much of knowledge of what used to be and how to do things and educating the young people like us. So I think that is something you will always have above us. So I definitely feel that you still have a lot of knowledge, giving it to your community or just giving it to your family. So I think that in itself, sharing that knowledge, you know, we always talk about grandmothers are very special, and, you know, you hear the stories and tales, and some of that has, like, from my personal experience, still is with me. I mean, say, for example, looking at traditional medicine, I might go to the hospital, but the first remedy I will take is something that my grandmother told me. So I think you have a lot of knowledge, and I think that is very special that you could share. And it could be about just life, of how to be a good person, respect. So I think I wouldn't say that what you can do. I think in your own capacity you would be doing it. And it doesn't really matter whether you're in a small hill town or by a lake or a river or a big city. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to also, give my gratitude for you to being here. Shows that you are also committed to following the international discussions. So thank you from my side.
Thank you for that. I see we have one hand raised. Mimi, was this intentional this time? You're still muted.
Hi, thank you. Yes, the question, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks for taking my question. So coming more from an energy policy and law background, I find that often that's looked at in isolation from, say, environment and gender nexus, and be good just to hear if there's also more information on data on more of that combination, because obviously land and land rights are relevant to energy use and extraction, and it does often affect women and girls disproportionately.
That's a really excellent question, and I'm going to pass over I'll open that up to any of my colleagues that might want to speak to that. I also just wanted to, because we're coming to a close to the end of our chat here, I wanted to recognize there are other pieces, there are other questions in the chat in terms of policies, that how do we change attitudes in governments and societal attitudes to be able to change policy. There's also a flag of some water defenders in Honduras who are from COPIN, from other colleagues that we're connected to that are struggling right now. And if there's international efforts, I think that's something I can't speak to right now, but certainly that we thank you for flagging that so that we can see with our partners if there is some movement that is happening or that we can be part of. And also just to say, I think, and Mara, you can correct me, but I think we can also move this chat and share some of this into the Pathable, I believe, space where we can share some of the links again. But I was wondering if, Varania, maybe I could pass over to you to kind of close us out. If you wanted to speak at all to the energy nexus, you could, not to put you on the spot about that, but just to say that I do think that that's an area where across the different actions that we have has been taken into account, and working really hard to make sure, because you are correct, it often gets treated as a silo. That the gender, energy, climate nexus is a key part of our work as well. But over to you, Varania.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you, everyone. Just briefly to say, so definitely about the energy part. Well, it's one of the key sectors that has been identified in pretty much every climate commitment at the national level. But we need to definitely look at the potential in terms of changing the patterns that we are seeing in terms of energy access, for instance, or also in terms of the representation of women in the energy sector at different levels, and particularly, by shifting from, the fossil fuel based energy matrix, and the hope that is in terms of moving that path to a greener path and to generate green value chains, how that will incorporate women in a systematically and meaningful manner, and we cannot think that this will be happening, in a direct manner if programs and capacity are not specifically targeting women. So definitely that's an area where we need to focus. And so just quickly, to say that, so thank you everyone for joining the session and for your active participation. And we have heard of the relevance of these 4 areas in shaping climate action at the national, subnational, and local levels. And we have also, heard the need to scale up the good work taking place at the local level, make sure that these efforts influence and inform policy and institutional frameworks. We also heard about women's leadership at different levels, from ministerial representation to social mobilization. There is progress there, but we need to speed up the pace, particularly when women still face remaining structural inequalities, such as women's right to land, a basic human right, as it was said, and that leads to economic empowerment, but also shift power dynamics overall. So it's crucial. Also, we heard about the relevance of including new, or maybe not so new, but at least in terms of the approach, of, for instance, like GVV, that are relevant to address increased risks due to the environmental and climate stressors, the gender data collection and analysis, and the intersection with climate and environmental dimensions to make visible gender differentiated climate impacts, to increase cross-sectoral capacity, and to better address gender gaps. So just to say that, Generation Equality Forum and the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition is not new in the sense of building broad alliances, but it is an opportunity today, a platform to strengthen interaction and collaboration, to share knowledge and relevance experiences, and to increase capacity for implementation, for action. So I will welcome everybody, to be very interested about learning more and join this broad network. So I think that's from my side for now. Thank you.
And with that, I think we're at the end of our time. Mara has kindly posted in the chat that we can continue this discussion through the Pathable Online and CSW forum space. We hope we can share all these links with you through that space. We'll investigate that and make sure we do. And we will share with you on that last note, the information that you need to become engaged in this action coalition. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of our speakers for sharing their really valuable insights. And I wish you all a safe and healthy and happy day. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. All the best.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.